All right, good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Bava Metzia Daf Kuf Yud Zayin. We're starting at a Mishnah toward the bottom of the page on Kuf Tez Zayin Amud Beis. Couple of notes for those of you who have not signed up for the scene. Please do so. Many of you have. We will finish the whole Masechta tomorrow. However, it is a long blot to finish, so we're gonna have to see them at the end. So we're gonna start on time. I'd recommend davening at this Marav. We're not gonna make the 9:45 Pasha. We're not gonna make it. We'll have food after, and then no shiur at all on Wednesday. Nothing, because that would be Tuesday's blot. And then Thursday we start Bava Basra, which is very exciting. Baruch Hashem. Okay, here we go. We are at the bottom of Kuf Tes Zayin Amud Beis. Let us start with a fresh Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Habayis v'ha'aliyah. Let's say that there are two people who are sharing a building. It's a two-flat. Rashi points out that it's a case where the person in the second floor is the socher, end of the first Rashi. In the Mishnah, Dahab is socher koi. Kid Amar Big Maras, we'll soon see. All right, so I own the base floor. You rented out the second floor. Aliyah, there's a hole in the ceiling. My ceiling is your floor, and I can see your chandelier. That's not good. So says the Gemara, and I who own the building, I'm the landlord. And I'm like, no, I like the nice show. I can see your ceiling. I'm not interested in fixing it. So the Gemara says, Hare Balho Aliyah, the person living on the second floor, Yorid Vidar Lamata. Make room, sweetheart. I'm coming in. So this guy who lives on the second floor, he comes into the main floor and says, I get to live here until you fix things up. We will see momentarily in the Gemara what this actually means. Does the guy in the Aliyah get to live there and kick out the guy from the main floor, or do they co-share that room? We'll see in a moment. This is all the Tanakama, Rabbi Yossi Omer, no. That's not the way things work. But really, both parties have to play a role in fixing this up. Hatachton nosen es hatikra, the person who owns the building, the bottom floor, the landlord, he has to give the tikra, which is the roof, the elyon es hama'aziva. And the person who lives upstairs has to give the ma'aziva. We'll see on Kuf Yud Zayin Amud Aleph what this means. But Lamaisa, the guy in the bottom floor puts in the basic structure of the roof. We'll see it's made out of some kind of mat. And the ma'aziba is our equivalent of plaster, of putty, to make sure that it's nice and smooth. So says the Gemara. It says the Gemara, when our Mishnah said that there was nifchas aliyah, nifchas bekama, how much of a hole does there have to be in the roof in order to trigger the din of our Mishnah? Is it kechuta se'ara, a tiny little hole? Is it the whole floor, 80%, 20%? So the Gemara is a machlokas amarim. Rav Amar Beruba, 51%. So you measure the square footage and you cut it in half. So let's say the whole right half of the building, the whole right half of the floor falls off. 50%, no machlokas. Everybody says you still have to live there. But 51%, that's when we trigger the din of our Mishnah. Ushmuel Amar, no, he's much more lenient when it comes to the need to trigger these dinim. He says be'arba. Even if there's a 4 amos missing, then you are already going to be in the machlokes of the Tanakam and Rabbi Yossi. Now let's analyze this. Rav Amar Beruba, aval be'arba alo. Why does Rav say that if the hole in the ceiling / floor is only 4, that we don't trigger the dinim of our Mishnah? Because Adam dar chetz yolamata v'chetz yolamala. Because you're right, I can't use certain parts of the floor in my house because there's a hole in them. No, sometimes we have to go upstairs or downstairs to do this. It's not abnormal. I do that in my house all the time. Now, most of their houses were not 2 flats. This house wasn't a house that was a 2-flat. I only live in the second apartment. Most of my stuff's in my apartment. Okay, now that the floor is broken, I get to put my my toiletries down. Okay, no, I'll walk downstairs. No big deal. However, Shmuel Amar, I disagree. But Arba, the reason why we say that the machlokes in our Mishnah kicks in when there's a hole in the floor of 4 is because no, people don't go upstairs or downstairs to get their stuff. That's not a normal way to live, not in their era. We've seen these houses before. When I was in New York in January, I stayed in an Airbnb. It had 6 floors, all the same. It was all one unit. Completely ridiculous. Who wants to live like that? But Lamaisa, it's normal for us to walk up many flights, and therefore, says Shmuel, he said it's not normal. Rav said it is normal. So therefore, he says we don't have our stuff on one floor and live on another floor. That's why he said Dalad Amos. Says the Gemara, Hechidami. What were the terms and conditions of this relationship between myself, the landlord, and you, the renter? Ida Amar Aliyah Zu. If the deal that I made with you is that it's dafka this second floor, well, guess what? The apartment is no longer, because the floor is not the same. I don't have an obligation to fix anything, and you're done. So just Azda, goodbye. You could say you're done. What you rented no longer exists. Ella de Amar Le, it must be he said aliyas tam, that when I rented you, I said you can have any of my second floor apartments. So then lo ger leach risi, then I have to rent you another one. If I get a very specific, we've seen this earlier in the Maseches, if I had a very specific set of terms with you, this apartment, okay, too bad. But if I said any apartment, so then I have to rent you a new one. So therefore, we don't know what our case is because neither of them really fit with our Mishnah. The Gemara gives two answers. Amar Rava lo tzricha da Amar Le, really, what was the case? Where I said to you, Aliyazu shani maskir lecha, I'm renting you an apartment, and I was very specific. Ki salka salik ba'ada, when everything is good, you'll live up there. V'chinachis chavas ba'ada, and if you need to come down, you'll come live down here. Says the Gemara, that's the ukimta of our Gemara, according to Rava. The Gemara says, Ihachi, look, Rava, nice answer, but my lamemra, I don't need a Mishnah to tell me that. If the ukimta is that you specifically put in the conditions that if your floor is working great, live up there. If it's not, then come down here. I don't need a Mishnah for that. That's ABCs. That was what you wrote in the Mishnah. So therefore, Ela Amar Rav Ashi, we reject the sheet of Rava and we say the case was a little bit different. Amar Le Aliyah Sha'al Gabe Bais Zeh Ani Maskir Lach. The aliyah that's up there, that's on top of this one, namely, Shabid Bayis La'aliyah. There's an inherent connection between those two. So when there's an inherent connection between that aliyah and this bias, then we come to the machlokes of the Tanakam and Rabbi Yossi. And we have a similar case like this. We're now 4 lines from the bottom, Kupta Zayin and Beis. What was this story where we see similar halachos? A man says to his friends that Dalis, this grapevine, shall gabe parsek, which is on top of a peach tree, which is fascinating because modern Hebrew for a peach is afarsek. I don't know why we added an aleph over the years. The Gemara said it's called a parsek. A parsek is a peach, different fruit.
Right, no, I'm saying, but it's the same thing with the aleph.
The Gemara says parsimon.
I don't know if the Gemara says, but I mean, that's what it is in regular,
in modern Hebrew, right?
It's persimmon.
Persimmon, right? Fascinating. So here, definitely something's going on here, but I don't know why we added the aleph. We can go speak to someone who knows a lot of Hebrew. So the Gemara says that let's say I'm giving you these grapevines that are growing on the peach tree. That's what I'm selling you. And then v'ne'akar haparsak, then the tree kind of began to wither and fall apart, and therefore we're going to have a problem with the grapevine. So says the Gemara, they brought the shaila to Bezdin. For as long as the vine is alive, go plant another sapling, go plant another peach tree. You have an obligation to this guy. Not dissimilar to our case. If the aliyah is tethered to the bias, you have an obligation to that person. Very similar. And that kol man shadol kaima. Good. Let's get into a whole bunch of questions that we will answer with a teku. Says the Gemara, bottom line of Kuf Tazayin Amud Beis, boy Rabbi Abba Bar Momel. When there's a hole in my roof, however you hold Rav or Shmuel, when there's a hole in my roof and I'm going to move down into your apartment, right? I'm the aliyah, you're the bias. Is it kidmei ikara? I used to live on the second floor by myself. So now when I get to move down into the apartment, goodbye, get out of the house. You're a delinquent landlord and you've left me with no home. Now you have to have no home because you didn't do your job. Or Odilma Shnehem Darin, or do we say no? Now they have to share the base, the main apartment. Why? What's the svara? To Amar Le, the owner of the apartment would say, Adaita le'afkinan lo agrilach. I never had in mind to kick myself out in order to rent you the apartment. Never had it in mind. So how do we view this? And im tim selomar shneim darin bo. And even if you want to say that both people live there, kshomishtamesh. When I do go into your house, right? Let's say I'm the aliyah, and now I'm living in your house, and we're both sharing the room because you're a delinquent landlord, but you have the rights to the house. Do we say when I enter into the house, derech psachim mishtamesh, I can go through the regular door that you go through? Oh, do we have to say that because the assumption is that the stairs are still there? This was an assumption in the Gemara that the stairs are on the outside of the house to the second floor. Oh, derech gagin mishtamish. I have to access your house from the outside stairs, and then I go back down in the internal stairs into your apartment. Can I go through your front door, or do I have to go a circuitous route? Do we say that my obligations are as they were before? I was never allowed to walk into your house before. I had to use the outside stairs. Is that true? And I had to take the outside stairwells to the second floor. And I had to go up toward the roof. I accepted upon myself the aliyah, but I wasn't expecting to walk up and down. Terms and conditions are in violation. So we don't know the answer to this yet.
How do you get out of a house?
No, they have stairs. But meaning the way that he gets into his house is the stairs.
Okay.
But if I live in the bottom house, but I have to go through the outside stairs, then I have to go up in the stairs and then back down to get into my house.
Yeah.
And then when I leave that bottom stairs, the bottom apartment, I have to go up and down. So I'm walking double. So the Gemara says that maybe that's not what he agreed to. And 8 lines down, if the guy who lived in the Aliyah, who is now living in the main apartment, says, oh, I never accepted upon myself to walk up and down. Now let's spin this to yet another case. I have a house with 2 more floors. So it's really a 3 flat now. So if I was living in the 3rd one and there was a problem, okay, no problem. But if the bottom floor, if the middle floor actually had a problem, what about going to the 2nd floor? Here's the svara. When the apartment was rented to the 2nd floor, you always had to walk up. O Dilma, only chad aliyah kabilale, shtei aliyos lo kabilale. Maybe says the Gemara that I, who live in the aliyah, I only was interested in going up 1 floor, not 2 flights. It's fascinating. Let's say that there's a Winston Towers apartment and you're renting one, and then the guy says, "I'm sorry, floor 2 is not available because of water damage. Go to live on floor 4." No, that's michutzla tonight. I'm not a person who walks 4 flights. That's not what I do. Let's say the person had medical issues, whatever, even if it wasn't. But the Gemara wants to know, how far do we go with the terms and conditions? Do we say I only expected to walk X number of floors, yes or no? Teku. Gemara says in all of these cases, we don't know. Says the Gemara, we learned the Shita, who was the dissenting opinion in our Mishnah of Rabbi Yossi Omer Atachton Nosen Esad Tikra. We learned the Shita in our Mishnah that unlike the Tanakama, Rabbi Yossi held that the person who lives in the Tachtona has to apply the Tikra, and the person who lives on the 2nd floor has to apply the Ma'aziva. My Tikra, says the Gemara, what is considered the roofing components or the floor components that the person living in the Tachtona, the owner, has to provide. Rabbi Yossi Reb Chanina Amar Kinim Visanin. These are mats and these are reeds and thorns, different definitions of the Rishonim. Vistini, this is a person's name. That's what Rashi says. Rashi says, Vistini, Amar Rish Lakish, Shem Chacham, Talmido Shel Rish Lakish. I think this is probably the first time in Shas we've seen his name. Any recollections? Anybody? I don't think I've ever seen this before. Every once in a while.
It comes up again.
Yeah. Is it just a one-off? It says the Gemara that this Amora, who was a Talmud, Amar in the name of Reb Shem ben Lakish Levachim, they're actually thin boards. And the Gemara just teaches velo pligi. There really is no machlokas, mar ki asrei, umar ki asrei. The status of a tikra is whatever is normal. So let's say today we would have said the tikra is the wood framing and the maziva is the flooring. I'm just making up what modern distinctions would be. I don't know exactly how it would work out, but it seems to be that the infrastructure components would be on the tachtona, and the kind of more surface topical things, the external to the infrastructure pieces would be an obligation on the aliyah. The Gemara tells us of a case 5-6 lines before the wide lines. Kufyad Zayinim and Aleph Hanhu Beitrei, 2 people. Dabu Daire, they lived in the same building. Chad Eloi, v'chad Tatoi. One lived in the upper place, one lived in the lower place. Ifchis Ma'aziva, and then a piece of the floor. Remember, we said the Ma'aziva is different than the Tikra, right? So the Ma'aziva is like some kind of sheath, some kind of layer, and now the water can leak through. So that's a problem. So then the guy upstairs is watering, he's cleaning his floor, and water starts dripping into the lower apartment. Not gishmak. It says the Gemara, Kimashi Maya Ilai, when he's washing with water on the upper floor, water is dripping down and ruining the lower apartment. Whose obligation is this? This is a machlokes amoraim. Who knew? But just think about the challenge, right? It's broken. So on the one hand, the landlord has a chiyuv, and at the same time, the guy who lives in the aliyah should not be dumping water through the hole. But they both play a role. So this is a machlokes amoraim. The Gemara says, if the ma'aziva is broken, that sheath, that waterproof layer is missing, so then the guy living in the aliyah has to fix it. Rabbi Loi, Mishum Reb Chia bar Yosef, we'll soon see it's Yosef. Amar, he says, atachton mitakin, machlokes amoraim. And says the Gemara, v'simin v'Yosef hurad mitzrayim. How do you remember which Amora said what? So the person who says it's Reb Yosef, the second Shita who said Tachton, Tachton is milashon v'Yosef hura, the lower one. Tachton and hura, beautiful little play on words. You have to know Torah for that. But, that's what the Gemara says as a simon. Okay, that's our machlokas amoraim. And the Gemara says, Lema Rabchia bar Abba v'Rabbi Loi. This machlokas that we just saw of Elyon and Tachton, when the Ma'aziva is missing, perhaps we can say it's beplukta to Rabbi Yossi v'Rabbanon kimiflage. Perhaps it's like the machlokas in our Mishnah. Our Mishnah had said that it's the landlord's responsibility, right? That was the Tanna Kama. Rabbi Yossi said it's both of their responsibilities. How does this machlokas work out? Says the Gemara on the second of the wide lines. Laman da Amar ha'elyon mitaking, like the Tanna Kama, Kesavar al hamazik leharchikes atzmo min hanizak. That means it's the same job as the aliyah, in our case of the missing ma'aziva, of the water dripping. It's the job of the aliyah to remove himself from that who is damaged. Uman da Amar tachton mitaking, the one who says that the person living downstairs has to fix things, Kesavar al hanizak leharchikes atzmo min hamazik. That the nizak, the one getting damaged, is the one who has to solve this problem. Again, let's just remember the tension over here, that the landlord is really supposed to fix it, but at the same time that the landlord has an achrayas to fix it, the aliyah, the tenant, is not supposed to be dumping water. So again, we gotta find out the right balance over here. We'll come up with a very important halacha for Hilchos Sukkos, ironically, by the end of this sugya. Some of the posts can bring this up. It says the Gemara of Tizbra. How can you say what you are saying? You want to say Rabbi Yossi v'Rabbanan le'inyan nezikin pligi? Hey, no, you've misunderstood that they're not talking about our case. How do we know? We have a Mishnah that we saw earlier in this Masechta. It says that it was Daf, which Katan is this base, Daf Chafhei? No, Nun Dalet. It says Le'el Nun Dalet Amud Aleph in my Gemara, in the Maseches Hashas. Do you not have that? The source Hashas says in parentheses, La'el Nun Dalet Amud Aleph and Bava Basra Chav Hey. What?
It's a little offset.
Oh, yeah, that's fun. That's classic in the older Gemaras. Classic. It makes it more fun.
Bava Basra's in the right spot.
Yeah, so he put both of them together here. One is in parentheses and one is in brackets.
Yeah,
I don't know how to darshan the different sograim. I don't know. It says the Gemara, it can't be that you can compare the machlokas between Rav Chia bar Abba and Rabbi Loi on the one side with the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Yossi in our Mishnah, because Ditnan, 5 lines into the wide lines. Marchikin es ilan min abor. You have to move a tree away from an open pit, esrim v'chamesh amma, because we're afraid that the roots are going to ruin the bore. Uvecharva v'shikma, with a carob tree and with a sycamore tree. The Gemara says chamishim amma, their root systems are double, and therefore, if you have a tree, you have to keep it far away from a pit, Fine, and that's bein milamala, bein minatzad, whether it's uphill versus downhill or right to left, it doesn't matter. The trees are brilliant creatures. The second they feel more moisture, they grow their roots in that direction. Ask Hashem how it works. Brilliant, genius move. Im habor kadam, if the pit was first, then kotzetz v'nosin damim. Then the person who planted the tree after the fact has to cut it down, but he gets paid. Ima ilan kadam, if the tree comes first, lo yikotz, then the person who dug the pit made a poor decision. They dug it in a poor spot, and lo yikotz, the person who has the tree, did not do anything wrong. Safek zeh kadam, 2/3 of the way down. What if we don't know what happened? Halacha is lo yikotz. All this is Tanna Kama. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Rabbi Yossi says, Afal pisha bor kodemes le'ilan. Even if the bor was planted first, lo yikotz. Shezeh chofer b'sok shalo v'zenoteh b'sok shalo. Because I can, in my own property, I can always add whatever's missing. If I have a tree, I can add a bor. If I have a bor, I can add a tree. And therefore, the Gemara says, Alma, Rabbi Yossi savar al hanizak laharchikes atzmo, v'Rabbanan savar al hamazik laharchikes atzmo, which is the exact opposite of what we said 8 lines ago. So you can't say that our machlokes between Rav Chia bar Abba and Rav Eloi mishum Rav Chia bar Yosef is connected to our Mishnah. If you want to say that these Amoraim have a connection, you should say it about this case, about the case of the bor, not about the case that we saw about laharchik between the mazik and the nitzak. It should be only beplukta de Rabbi Yossi v'Rabbanan dehasam kimi pligi. Rabbi Yossi v'Rabbanan dehacha b'mai pligi. What are Rabbi Yossi and the Rabbanan arguing about in our Mishnah? Says the Gemara, what they're arguing about in our Mishnah, and this will underscore the machlokas that we see in our Mishnah on the bottom of Kuf Tes Zayin Amud Beis, is bechozek tikra kamiflagi. What does this mean? So says the Gemara, let's explain. Rabbanon sabre ma'aziva achzuke tikrahu. The ma'aziva is what strengthens the ceiling. Ve'achzuke tikra al hatachton b'lachzuke. And that is a din in the bottom person. That's why in our Mishnah, according to the Tanna Kama, he can move down into that apartment because the person downstairs is obligated to get it done. But Rabbi Yossi Savar, no, ma'aziva is simply ashvuye gumosu. It's just simply smoothing things out. Ashvuye gumos al ha'elyon le'ashvuye. That's just for the guy upstairs. You don't want a bumpy floor. I have in one room in my basement. It's the room where I keep all my bris equipment. It has drywall. It's never been plastered. I don't care. I'm the only person who ever goes in that room. So the drywall is there. If I cared, I'm the one who should do the plastering. I'm not going to go, I don't care. It was easy peasy. Just leave it alone. But if I wanted it, it'd be on me. Same thing. The guy who's living upstairs, the floorboards are in. You want it smooth? Go buy some plaster from Lowe's. It's not my problem. Go take care of it yourself. So says the Gemara, Eini, is this really true? Now, without Rashi, this would have been a very difficult piece of Gemara to understand. Rashi can be found 4 lines into the wide lines at the beginning of the line. Dibur Hamaschel, Eini v'Amar Ravashi. This is going back ad Reb Chia bar Yossi parich. What did Reb Chia bar Yossi hold? He's at the second of the last of the 2 narrower lines. He held that Ha'elyon is metaken. So the Gemara wants to know, in regards to the sheet of Reb Chia bar Abba, who says that the Elyon is metaken, the guy who has the water on the second floor when there's a hole in the ceiling, he should stop. It says the Gemara, I don't understand. What did we say? That when the guy on the second floor is throwing arrows, as it were, literal translation, the girei delay, they're his arrows. That's no different than me pushing water down the hole into your apartment. It's like being a mazik bi'adayim. That you should be pater from such kind of behavior. Says the Gemara, no, there's a little bit of a difference. And here's where the Chiddush by Hilchos Sukkos comes in. Says the Gemara, depaske mayim v'hadar nafle. The water doesn't immediately flow from my upstairs apartment to your downstairs apartment. No, it sits. And then, I stepped on the water and then the puddle shifted and some of that's what we're talking about. So then here's where the poskim come up with this fascinating idea. Let's say I have this in my house. We built a porch, 12 by 20, right off the back of my house, outside of our sliding door. That's our sukkah. Can I wash netilas yadayim on the wood of my porch? So the poskim say this exact svara, absolutely mutter, no problem at all. You could wash your hands on wood and then it'll drip down into the cracks and water the grass, mutter, because it's completely indirect and not your intention. Can you wash on sidewalk, knowing full well it'll drip onto the grass? Poskim say mutter. So if you're out
regularly or
Shabbos Yontif, whatever. Yeah, so that is considered mutter with a very similar svar, that it's not direct and it's not what you want. It sounds like a huge kula, but it is actually b'maisa. You know it's gonna happen. It's a psik resha. But it's mutter because it's not what it's indirect. Normally we say that even by a psik resha, it's really psik resha denicha, like we really want this to happen. We're usually not upset.
Is when you want the watering to happen, right? You don't want care less. So it's not really nicha.
Why isn't it nicha then?
Because you're not watering.
Watering the grass is good for you. Do we define nichale based on a subjective desire that I don't want to water the grass because I want to wash the netilas yadayim?
That's make a difference. Doesn't make any difference.
How do we define that? I don't know. What's the lo nichale?
I mean, that's what the word nicha means.
Right. You're not watering the grass. You're washing your hands. Yeah, you may not wash your hands over grass because it's clear.
But it's a rum. It's not.
But even a psik resha, the lo nichale is an insur derabbanan.
Normally, yes.
Normally.
That's why it's good.
Yeah, so it is a chiddush. But the poskim do bring this idea. Okay, that brings us to yet a new Mishnah on the bottom of Kuf Yud Zayin Amud Aleph. We will be going tonight until the Mishnah on the bottom of Kuf Yud Zayin Amud Beis, and then we're going to stop there. And again, tomorrow we have a marathon, so let's be on. We're going to start right on time, and we're going to race. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be amazing.
Love that.
Habayis v'ha'aliyah. Your colored commentary is nonstop.
Frank Edie has to go to graduation in Cleveland this week.
All right, here we go. Habayis v'aliyah shel shnayim shenaflu. We have a house and an attic that belong to 2 people. Now the question is about rebuilding. Here we're talking about co-owners. We're not talking about rentals anymore. This is one of the hard parts of these Mishnayos. You can't read them like flippantly. You have to know what's going on. In general, you shouldn't learn Mishnayos flippantly, but certainly in these cases, every case is flipped already, and we're back to co-owners. So here's what happened. Amar Balhu Aliyah Lebal HaBais Livnos. No, let's call the construction company and let's build. Who ain't a Rotza Livnos? The other guy doesn't want to build. So Harei Balhu Aliyah Bonas HaBais V'Dar B'Socha She'Yisin Lo Es Yitzioso. The guy who lives upstairs, he's going to build one floor, and he's going to live in that apartment until the other guy, the original main floor owner, decides that he wants to pony up. Rabbi Yehuda's not having it. Rabbi Yehuda says you're not allowed to do that. Omer, Af Zed Dar B'Soch Shel Chaver. You're not allowed to do that because if you do that, you're living in your friend's apartment and Tzarech Lahalos Lo Schar. You got to pay him for it. You just took over his physical space. It seems that the physical space of ownership, the space of the first floor, does not belong to you. Afal that you paid for it, but that wasn't your space. Your space was the second floor. So maybe what he should have done is built like pedestals, just corners, like the stilts, a house on stilts, because then he could have done that. But over here, this model doesn't work. Ella says Rabbi Yehuda, Ella Balu Aliyah Bona Es Habayis Ve'es Aliyah. He builds both. And Mikra Es Alyona, he puts a roof on the upper roof, Yoshev Babayis, Chiyitin Lo Es Yitziosa. And he gets to stay in the house until he gets paid. So says the Gemara. That brings us, so says the Mishnah, that brings us to the Gemara on Kufya Zayin Amud Beis, right at the top, which highlights a subtlety that we might have missed from Rabbi Yehuda in this Mishnah. What Rabbi Yehuda is saying is that you're not allowed to benefit from your friend's property. Remember, that was what he said. He's like, no, you can't live on the main floor, even if you pay for it. It's not your spot. So says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yochanan b'shlosha makomos shana lanu Rabbi Yehuda aser la'adam sheyehana mimamon chavero. There are three scenarios where you are not allowed to benefit from the money of a friend. Chado haditz not. One, the Mishnah that we just learned. That's why he said you're not allowed to build that floor and live in it, because if you do, then you're chayav to pay rent to the person who actually owned it. Idach mahi. What's source number two? That's not. I know saying this Gemara we've seen about 10 times. Over and over again. Bava Kama 1, 2, 3 places. In this Masechta we saw it once, and we haven't learned Avodah Zarah yet. We'll get there. It's all over the place. I know saying Semer L'Tzaba. If I give wool to a person who dyes clothing, and it was Litzboa Lo Edom Utzvo Shachor. I asked him, I want it to be red. I come back to the story, he dyed it black. Not very good at his job. Shachor Utzvo Edom. Or I asked him to dye it black, and he dyed it red. This is a Machlokes tonight. Rab Meir Omer no sen lo dmei tzemer. You pay for the tzemer. Rabbi Yehuda says you're not allowed to keep the tzemer because you're not allowed to benefit from your friend. What do you do instead? Rabbi Yehuda Omer im hashevach yoser al ha'otzah. If the benefits are greater than the actual expenses, then no sin the lower one, then you pay him your expenses. Hayitzia. Im ha'otzah yiser al hashevach. If your expenses are greater than the actual gain in the quality of the fabric, no sin lo es hashvach. But what do you not keep? The tzemer. And that's the same shita. That's source number 2. The Rabbi Yehuda is oser la'adam she'ehanim imamon chaveru. V'idach mahi. What's the third mari makom? Rabbi Yehuda holds that you're not allowed to benefit from your friend's property. It's not. We have a Mishnah that we've also seen before. Mishepara miktzas chovo. I've paid part of my dues. I owe you $100. I paid you 20. And then v'hishlish shtaro. So I paid you 20 out of the 100. Then I give you the star. Or I give a third party, a star for 100. I say to the third party, if I don't pay the rest by February 1st, give him the whole star. Now I already paid him 20, but the document says he can collect the full 100. And in the end of the day, he's able to collect 120. I gave him 20. I was really hoping to pay on time, but I failed. So he's able to collect 120. All the shilas you're going to ask about ribbis. Good. Go ayin in the Rishon. Fine. It says the Gemara, Higias man velo nosan. Let's say that the time happened and he didn't pay. Rabbi Yossi Omer yitain. Rabbi Yehuda Omer lo yitain. Oh, Rabbi Yehuda l'shitaso. You're not allowed to benefit from your friend in that way. That's not allowed. You're not allowed to get overpaid. Not because of ribbis. That's a separate child. But because he holds it, you're not allowed to benefit from your friend's property. So says the Gemara, Amai, why are you assuming that all 3 of these cases are Rabbi Yehuda cases where, and I'll just pull from the second line again on this page, where he says that Asr la'adam she'eino mimamon chaveru. All 3 of these cases could be learned in a different lens. Dilma ad kan, maybe in the first case of our Mishnah, lo ka'amar Rabbi Yehuda hacha el mishum de'ika shacharusa. Maybe we can say that by living in the apartment, I'm going to blacken the walls. We'll just call it depreciation, wear and tear. When I stayed in an Airbnb once and I was walking down the stairs and the whole railing came off in my hand. So it's wear and tear. So I borrowed your house. I'm using the oven. The walls are all blackened. That's what Shachri Rusa is. Or maybe in the second case, which we said was the Rabbi Yehuda case, Mishum de Kamashana. There, that case is different because there I made a kinyan because I was Mashana, that item. It's no longer what it was. I own it. That there's a unique set of halachos when we have a kinyan. So maybe that case as well is not a real Rabbi Yehuda case because I could be okim the case where it's not so specific to Rabbi Yehuda. And third, we're a third of the way down on Kuvid Zayin Amud Beis. Mishapar mixas chavonami have asmachta v'shamina le Rabbi Yehuda da'amar lo kanya. Perhaps we can say there that it's because asmachta is lo kanya. Maybe it's not because he holds that asher l'adam shenem imamam chaveru. So Rabbi Yochanan tried to bring this fancy Gemara that Rabbi Yehuda has three as a shita that finds itself in three cases that it's asher to be nena from your friend's money. The Gemara says not so fast. It's not so pasha that that's actually true. Fine. So says the Gemara. All right, so let's say that going back to our Mishnah, remember our Mishnah was a case where you and I wanted to co-build. Well, I wanted to co-build and you didn't want to build. Now let's change the case. We're ready to build, but we want to change some of the products. I want to change my walls on the lower part of the house. Or if you own the upper, you want to change some of the features of the upper house. So we'll soon see that it depends who you are if you're allowed to make those changes. If I live in the bottom of the house, I can't do something that weakens the lower part of the house. And if it's the upper part of the house, you're not allowed to do something that makes the upper part of the house heavier because that places undue weight on the lower part of the house. Instead, we can only strengthen the bottom or weaken the top. But we cannot strengthen and make heavier at the top or weaken the bottom. And this is what the Gemara says in full detail. We're a third of the way down. Amar Rav Acha bar Adam Ishmei De'ula. Let's say Tachton Havalashanos. The guy lives in the bottom apartment. He wants to make some changes. Bigvil Shomenlo, Begazis and Shomenlo. If he wants to change the bricks from Gvil to Gazis, Gazis is thinner. You can't do that because it may not hold up the top of the apartment quite as well. Bichfis and Shomenlo, Bilevanin and Shomenlo. You're not allowed to switch from Kfis bricks to Levanin bricks because the Levanin bricks are a little bit thinner. They end up being 3 tfachim, and the kfisin end up being 4. If you live on the bottom, you cannot weaken the structure. It's not allowed. L'sakech ba'arazim, you want to use cedar wood, a very hard wood, shomenlo, no problem. Bishkamim, you want to use sycamore wood, that's a little less of a dense wood, ain't shomenlo. You're not allowed to do that. You're the guy on the bottom. You cannot weaken the integrity of the lower apartment. Lemait bechalonos, you want to have fewer windows, more solid walls, no problem. Shomenlo, you want to make it the whole thing into all windows, no way. That you kill the integrity. Laharbos bechalonos and shomenlo. Lehagbia and shomenlo, you want to raise the height, we don't listen to you. Lemait shomenlo, you want to make it lower, you can do that, no problem at all. Why? There, it's not because of that, but if you raise the roof, the guy upstairs has to walk more stairs to get upstairs. You can't do that without his agreement. You can't do that. Same exact height. Fascinating halachos. Good. Now, all of that was from the perspective of the Tachton guy. Now let's flip. The Gemara says halfway down, Elyon Shabbalashanos, the guy in the upstairs apartment who wants to make changes. Let's go through all the same things, but we'll find all the halachos are reversed. Because it's shomen lo, with one type of brick, no problem. Bigvil ain't shomen lo, it's reversed. You want to use lighter bricks upstairs? No problem. My walls can handle that. The thinner bricks, no problem. You're not adding any weight. You can't use the heavier wood because now the upstairs apartment is holding less. It has less weight to put on the walls of the lower. The rabos because I don't need the upper walls to have as much integrity as the lower walls. You want to remove windows and have more wall. You're adding undue weight. You're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to make the upper floor 10 feet instead of 8 feet because now you've added more lumber and that's too much weight. You want to make your ceiling from 8 feet to 6 feet? No problem. I'm with you. So the Gemara is very, very sensitive about changing the structure of the building. I'm no posek. I would imagine that nowadays this matters very, very little because the level of physics that's put into architecture now is so exceptional. You know exactly how much weight can be carried. The contractor can tell you cedar wood versus sycamore, no difference to myself. So I would imagine that in the modern era, there are differences, but probably not what we see here in the Gemara. The point is that we cannot sacrifice the quality of the lower in order to hurt the upper and vice versa. That's kind of the nakud of the Gemara. Let's say nobody has money. Ein lo lazev, ein lo lazev, lo lazev mai. All right, building fell down. You and I are destitute. Our home was just brought to brought to its knees. What are we supposed to do, Lemaisa? We're going to sell it, but who keeps more money? Is it 50-50? Do we say that the guy in the Aliyah, same square footage, everybody has 1,000 square feet. Do you get the same amount of money that I do if I'm the Tachton? Who gets more?
Is he a Nair or a Baal?
We are co-owners. So skip the parentheses. The Gemara says, Tanya, we have a brisa that discusses this, and this will bring us to the end of the day today. The Gemara says, Tanya, Reb Nosson Amar Tachton Notel Shnei Chalokin. The guy who owns the bottom of the apartment, he gets 2 parts. Elyon Shlish. So it's a 2/3, 1/3 breakdown. The Acherim Omrim, other Tanaim hold, Tachton Notel Shlosha Chalakim, not 66%, but 75%. The Elyon Notel Revia. So there's a machlokes between the Tanaim. Do we say that the Tachton gets 2/3, or does the Tachton get 3/4? Does the Tachton get 66%, or does the Tachton get 75%? Omar Rabba says, I'll paskin for you between these great Tanaim. Nekot de Reb Nasan biyadcha. Reb Nasan, who was the shita that said that it's 2/3, you should agree with him. The Dayana, who he was a Dayan. The Nachis le'um kadadina. And his style of learning was to go down to the Omika, then he doesn't make mistakes, and therefore we know he's right. Kasavar kama mafsid aliyah bebayis tilsa. How much is given away when you give away the top apartment? You've only really lost 1/3. Lamasa, you have the ikar of the house. Hilkach isle tilsa. Therefore, we say the value of the top is 1/3, and therefore the person who owns the aliyah only gets 1/3. But it's not equal ownership. Nowadays, we probably would not break it up this way. I would imagine. No, we would have said 50-50, similar price. Ground floor, a little bit more, but 2/3, 1/3 is a pretty big difference. We'll stop right here. Metzia Hashem will pick up with this new Mishnah and finish the Masechta Metzia Hashem tomorrow. If you have yet to pay for the siyum and you're planning on joining, please Venmo or Zelle me or give me cash. Looking forward to celebrating yet another siyum on Masechta. Wishing you all a beautiful night.
Thanks.